My father treated me like I was invisible, so when he finally needed me, I vanished. The voicemail was 38 seconds long. I'd listened to it 11 times already, watching my father's voice crack through my phone speaker while I sat in my car outside his hospital. Please, son, I know I haven't been there, but they're saying I need a kidney and you're the only match. Please just come inside. I deleted it and started my engine. He'd spent 22 years pretending I didn't exist. Now, he needed my organs to survive. The parking garage exit was straight ahead, and I didn't look back once. My father had two sons. My older brother Dominic was the golden child, the athlete, the one whose games my father never missed, whose graduation photo hung in the living room, whose college tuition got paid without question. I was the accident, the one who looked too much like the mother who'd left, the one my father couldn't stand to acknowledge, because every time he saw my face, he saw his failure. At family dinners, he'd talk to Dominic for hours and answer my questions with one-word grunts. At my high school graduation, his seat was empty because Dominic had a golf tournament 3 states away. When I got accepted to medical school on a full scholarship, he forgot to respond to my text for 6 days. Dominic got a car. The first time I realized he genuinely hated me, I was 12. We were at my uncle's birthday party, and someone asked my father how many kids he had. He said 1. He was looking right at me when he said it. My uncle tried to correct him, gesturing toward me standing 3 feet away with a plate of cake in my hands. My father just shrugged and said Dominic was the only one that counted. I dropped the plate. Frosting splattered across my shoes. Nobody helped me clean it up. That night, I promised myself I'd become someone so successful he'd have to acknowledge me. I spent the next decade chasing that approval like it was oxygen. Straight A's, varsity track, medical school, nothing worked. The more I achieved, the more invisible I became. But it got worse. When I was 19, I needed surgery. Nothing life-threatening, just a torn ACL from a running accident, but I'd be out for months and the recovery would be expensive. I called my father to ask if he could help with the medical bills since my insurance didn't cover everything. He laughed. He actually laughed. Then he said I should have been more careful and hung up. 3 weeks later, I saw photos on social media of Dominic's new apartment that my father had furnished completely, down to the leather couch and 60-inch television. I paid for my own surgery by working double shifts at the campus library until my leg healed. I stopped calling after that. He didn't notice. The distance grew into a canyon. I graduated medical school, became a surgeon, got engaged to a woman named Priya, who loved me in ways I didn't know were possible. Through all of it, my father was a ghost. He didn't come to my graduation, didn't respond when I sent him wedding invitations, didn't acknowledge the birth of my daughter 2 years later. But Dominic kept me updated whether I wanted it or not. Dad's so proud of me. Dad's paying for my house. Dad's investing in my business. Every text felt like a knife sliding between my ribs. I started blocking the updates. Then I blocked Dominic entirely. Then I changed my number and moved across the country and built a life where my father's name never came up. For 3 years, I almost forgot he existed. Then the call came. Not from my father directly. From the hospital. A social worker named Dr. Amelia Okonkwo, 15 years in transplant coordination, explaining that my father had end-stage renal failure. Both kidneys were shutting down. Dialysis was buying time, but he needed a transplant within months or he'd die. They'd tested Dominic first, not a match. Then they'd tracked me down through medical records, run the compatibility tests without my consent, and discovered I was a perfect match. She asked if I'd consider donation. I asked how they'd found me. She said my father had begged them to search, that he'd told them I was his only hope, that he'd finally admitted he had 2 sons. I drove to the hospital that night, not to donate, to look him in the eyes. He was in room 412, hooked to machines, smaller than I remembered. When I walked in, his face crumpled like wet paper. You came, he whispered. I thought you'd never. I pulled out my phone and played his voicemail on speaker. We both listened to him begging for my kidney, calling me son for the first time in 22 years. When it finished, I asked him one question. Do you remember what you said at Uncle Ray's birthday? His face went blank. I told him he'd said Dominic was his only child, that I was standing right there, that I was 12 years old and holding birthday cake. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. I put my phone away, told him I hoped Dominic's kidney would work out somehow. Then I walked out. My father died 11 months later. Dominic called to tell me, but I didn't answer. I read about the funeral in an email I never responded to. They buried him next to his parents in a plot that had room for 2 sons, but only one name was on the family headstone.